and tell us what you think is going to happen with the point guard situation, please, sir.
Well, they have a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak. They are talking to people. I think we posted on the premium board earlier that like we're trying to confirm a couple of things, and for those, I guess the uninitiated, like if we hear something from one person, we can't report it because we need to verify it with another source that we trust or two more sources that we trust. So there are things happening. I think maybe last year we started talking about how like silence doesn't mean inaction, and that's pretty much the case here. The UNC staff has for years, really since Roy Williams arrived in 2003, just been a group that is very quiet when it comes to media. Let's put it that way. And so it takes a lot of efforting with sources, industry sources, national sources, to try to figure out exactly what's happening over there. And so it can be hit or miss, but like I said, we know they are talking to guards. We think that even now they may be talking to some guys who might be considered combo guards more than lead guards, but they're looking for at least a guard. The two names that I think we shared within the last like 48 hours, we can share them here. Xavier Lee from Princeton, and then Malachi Smith from Dayton. We know that those there's been at least initial conversations, and I want to be very clear because in the portal it's very hard to kind of uh, differentiate between like who is a target, who's kind of a candidate, who are they talking to, who did they talk to one time and never call again. So we know that they've had initial conversations with those guys, and that's really as far as we want to go right now because it could be a situation where after the initial phone call they're like, yeah, this is not a fit for them on the player side or them on the school side, and it goes nowhere. And then when they commit to another school, people will say, well, Carolina missed on this player. And it's like, not really, because it didn't progress past one conversation. So that's why it's tricky. And to be frank, we do the best job we can to figure out exactly how many times they're talking and how long they're talking and all that stuff. But we don't have 100% of the information. So we're working with a big piece of the pie, but not the entire pie of information. So that makes it a little difficult to track down. So, said all that to say, they are talking to other guards. They're setting up calls. Who knows what might happen when the dead period ends Thursday night. Visits can start on Friday. So that's kind of where things are. And I know that's, to me, people will say that's not an update, but it is because they are still trying to get another guard, at least one. I would have said just one a week ago, and now I think it's unclear because it depends on who they get, again, in this new era, how much they cost, and if they don't cost as much as somebody else, then maybe you can get two. But if you have to pay fair market value, then maybe you can only get one. So all of those conversations, all that stuff is involved with who they're talking to, and who they're trying to get on a visit, and who they're interested in. So it's not just one data point; it's like seven or eight that they're working through to find these guys.
And I would encourage anybody who's a participant in the IC message board community. I mentioned it on a podcast last week on one of the commitment shows that I think just because something is not being reported by Sherelle or Ben or whomever, it doesn't mean things aren't happening. It just means that, IC's party line has always been, like Sherelle said a second ago, we're going to twice confirm it, right? And vet it and make sure that it's real before, we'd rather be right than first. And a lot of times we're both, but I'll stop tooting our own horns. I just want everybody to kind of understand that like there's a lot of moving parts. And, if you see somebody on social media say that North Carolina has been in contact or, North Carolina is, such and such is considering North Carolina, that could be something as simple as their brother's cousin's agent could have left a voice message at the UNC basketball office, or it could be something very, very in depth. And when it becomes mutual, like Sherelle said, I see will report it, but it's all of those considerations and conversations between players in North Carolina are not equal. And I think it's just important to remember that. So as you guys are seeing things pop up and change and shift and move, just kind of keep that in mind, that just because you see, college basketball insider 47693 on Twitter say that, such and such player X has heard from North Carolina, it does not necessarily mean that there's been anything other than an attempt to connect or a preliminary conversation or what have you. Go ahead, Trill.
And we said it a lot last year, and I guess we have done maybe a poor job of doing it this year, but it is true that this stuff does move like insanely fast. Someone who is a target on Thursday might not be on Friday, and someone you've never heard of on Wednesday might be on campus visiting on Saturday. That is not uncommon. I think the Nate George situation is a perfect example where it looked like it was going one way, and we prepared for it to go one way, and then it didn't within 30 minutes or so of the announcement. We thought it was going a different way. So that kind of stuff happens. And that's why I, I think we all have to try to be very cautious of how we label something as a hit or a miss or true interest or not true interest. And that can be frustrating because it's like, well, I see that Carolina's contacted him. What does that mean? And so all the time we don't exactly know what it means. And so we effort to find out. So it's just, that's more of like inside baseball than probably anybody wanted. But that's I don't want to say frustration, but that can be one of the challenges of portal recruiting is that it could be a phone call, it could be two, it could be the head coach, like Joey said, it could be just somebody from the office calling and saying, hey, can you give me this kid's number? All those things are at play, and it's our job to kind of differentiate and suss all that out.
And that's where when I made the comment about Sherelle and Ben working really hard. I mean, that's the stuff that they're doing all the time to try to determine what's news, what's real, and what's not. And by the time they find out that something's real, it could be changed. So next thing I want to get to, Sherelle, you mentioned Nate George, but I want to talk about the point guard position because I think a lot of folks that are part of the IC community, including these 700 plus folks that have joined us on a random Sunday night to talk ball, I think a lot of folks are still burned from last year's whiffs on getting post players. And regardless of what the reasons for that were, the end of the story was North Carolina did not start the year with a true, starting ACC caliber five man that they wanted and had to have to replace Armando Bacot. I think some folks are starting to feel the same way about the point guard position. And so I'm going to ask you, Sherelle, and I'm going to try to cushion this a little bit for you. Um, do you feel like there's some of that going on? Do you feel like maybe, the separation with Elliot Cadeau might be contributing to that negatively? And I realize you've got to kind of be careful about your words. So I'm gonna riff here for a second to give you a chance to think about what you want to say. But I want you to kind of think about the parallels that may exist and kind of help fans understand what of that might be real and what of that might not be. And then how does it affect the way North Carolina continues to find that next point guard to start, when the season rolls around in September.
I don't begrudge anyone who is worried or frustrated and thinks this is a continuation of the issues that they had last year because it does feel similar just at a very surface level. There's a couple of guys they were interested in. Those couple of guys, actually, only one took a visit, but those couple of guys say they're interested, and within a couple of days they're committed to other schools, and it's kind of like North Carolina, one of the top programs of all time, has an opening at the point guard position, and people seem to be, I don't want to say running away from it, but not as interested, perhaps, as the fan base and our readers and subscribers think they should be. So on one hand, I completely get it. I think it makes a ton of sense. I would say just from the folks that we talk to, the other side of the coin is that it's a different year this year. There are always just numbers wise, just not saying there's guards are inherently better than bigs, just more guards naturally than there are bigs. So that helps UNC some. And then three, everything we've been told is that the organization, that the communication, that the plan, that the recruiting board, all those things this year are just far more advanced than they were last year. So when you take that into account, I think that is the reason that I don't say give them the benefit of the doubt, but that's the reason that folks shouldn't full on panic yet. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to say you shouldn't full on panic. If you want to full on panic, I get it. But I think that's the hesitation is that there is more of an infrastructure than it was last year. Last year was very much the Wild Wild West. It was like this player went somewhere else. It's like find a player, and it is like um, like a whack-a-mole. You just find a player over here, and then you go over here, and he's gone, and you go over here. But at least this time, they've had pre-existing relationships with agents and representatives, so they kind of know all the guys out there, and they're just going through their board. So the fact that there's a recruiting board this year, I would say more so than last year. The fact that there's advisors and they're working a plan, I think should make people feel a little bit better. But again, I don't begrudge at all anyone who feels some deja vu from what happened last year.
We get it. And again, we'll also try to tell you guys what is real and what's not, just as long as we're not kind of stepping on source information or kind of leaking something that we don't have permission to share. And I think it's important too for people to kind of remember, just because there's a point guard available in the portal does not mean he's a fit for what North Carolina is trying to do. And I see a lot of folks, like, as soon as the name pops up in the portal, they're like, hey, why don't we go get this guy? And then, this by the same token, you've seen situations where players from smaller schools just may not have been a fit or may not have worked out. So there's just layers to this that I think that not even the three of us can really wrap our brains around. So just something else to think about, rather than just saying that North Carolina missed on a kid. They're going to miss on some, but go ahead, John.
I mean, in this case, it's not like, as we've seen with the player Lee and Smith, who Lee just entering. Not everybody's there right at the same time, and the demand is much greater than the supply. I mean, you have pretty much all the SEC teams that are trying to build a team through the portal. Plus, I mean, you go through pretty much every team. So
Kansas doesn't have anybody on the roster right now.
Yeah, so I think it is like, to be trying to do a full rebuild through the portal is, it's challenging. I think the fact that they, looking last year, they got Kate Tyson. I think it was April 28th it was announced. I think it was probably done a little earlier than that, but I think getting a big and now being able to focus on the guard spots and maybe still on the wing can help that. But it's a very competitive marketplace, especially when guys are entering almost one or two at a time, and then everybody in college basketball is focusing on those one or two guys.
So let's focus on those two names that Sherelle mentioned, that we have been able to confirm a certain amount of what would you call it, Sherelle? Not interest, but there's been some sort of preliminary discussion. Yeah, contact. There we go. Malachi Smith at Dayton and Xavier Lee, which is that dude has just gone full on Kardashian popular with Carolina fans in the last 48 hours since he entered the portal. But Sean, give us a little bit about what may or may not be a fit about those two players for what North Carolina has historically tried to do and what you think they may try to do next season.
So Lee is obviously going to be the more challenging of the two to get, just given his upside and where he's at. He really came on as a sophomore at Princeton, so NBA scouts were already making their way to New Jersey as during his sophomore year to watch him. That only increased this year. So he's been getting looks at that level now the last 2 years. Sherelle was mentioning, based on the salaries, at one guy, two guys. I think based on Lee, that could be the guy, because one, his first step and quickness is elite. Like, he can get by, and he has size, so he can get by you. I know finishing at the rim, still a little hit or miss, but that first step, I don't care where he's playing, it's not going to take any time getting used to the competition based on him being able, his quickness and just
especially for a big kid, like for him to be as wiry as he is. Yeah, he's got a hell of a first step.
Yeah. He shot 37% from three. So he's, if UNC were to get him, he's the point guard that now you can mix in and you feel, hey, he can pass the ball and he can score the ball at the high level, versus Smith, solid. UNC fans saw him play when they played Dayton earlier in the year. He didn't have his best game, but very high assist rate, kind of your old school traditional pass first point guard. He shot the ball well from three, but if you have him, and this kind of goes back to their first target seemed to be McNeely, who's a shooting guard and scorer. So if they were to get a guy like Smith, you're looking at that roster, at least I am, and I'm saying, well, who's scoring, who's shooting? The 3-point upside is lacking, and the scoring ability from that guard spot is lacking as well, just in terms of, watching LJ Cryer, he was the only reason Houston was not down 20 early on, in his ability to create a basket and hit at a high percentage outside. So to me, it very different tiers from what Lee could bring, but also different competition and price points compared to Smith. But I mean, to me, it's you need that point guard, but you also need, and maybe this goes to Sherelle's point on the combo guard, a guy that can score and get to the basket and create his own shot. Because right now, we're looking at Trimble and two freshmen. Dixon, more of a 2-1 that is a 40% shooter, but not a guy that's going to break you down. And then Dennis, who is talented and has some of that athleticism, but I think definitely a little bit, probably a year or so away from truly making an impact.